Well,
Morning.
good morning to all of you. I know it is Sunday morning, 10:15, so whoever is here must really, really love poetry. Yeah. So originally we were supposed to be four, but two of the poets, Arundhati Subramaniam and Akhil Katyal, could not make it due to the ongoing Indigo chaos that's happening with the airlines. So we will miss them, but we promise to give you an interesting, robust conversation on poetry. And I just wanted to say that this may be a very good opportunity for all of you if you have any questions about poetry, the craft, about the life of being a poet. At the end of our reading and conversation, we'd love to answer any and every question you might have. Throw them at us. So, anyway, uh, I'm really thrilled here to be with James Shea, who is a brilliant poet, and he comes to us from Hong Kong, originally from the United States. I also am from India, but also from the United States, so it's nice to, have a conversation um, discussing our craft. And we're both very different writers. In fact, the other two writers who couldn't join us, each writer was so unique. And at first I was like, wow, I've never had this honor of being able to have such a diverse conversation. And we too also, I feel, are very different writers in some ways. But I think it's really apt that we are in a space that was once a jail. And so the theme of our talk between silence and song becomes even more powerful. Like, what does it mean? We're sitting in a space where people were once imprisoned. And many of our writers come under threat for freedom of expression, for wanting and being able to tell the truth. So I think that, what we do is very sacred. What we do is very radical. What we do is, it's rebellion also. But I want to talk about what it means. I want us to talk about what it means to be a poet and be between song and silence. So maybe if you could tell us a little bit, because your work holds a lot of space. There's a lot of space in between each line. There's space on the page. There's space between words, and I know your work is also influenced by haiku. So if you could tell us, what does space mean to you? What is the relevance of it in your work?
Yeah, thank you, and thank you all for coming this morning. So yeah, between song and silence, I mean, it assumes there's this binary, right? There's song over here, there's silence over here. But I don't know. I think of people like John Cage, who came up with this famous composition, 4 minutes and 33 seconds of just for piano that's just complete silence. And his premise is that, in a way, there is no silence. I mean, when the musicians are not playing, you start to pick up other sounds of someone coughing, sounds of the air conditioning. And so for me, that kind of is the way I also think about writing too, that there's never really there's not really a blank page or an empty mind, right? There's always something churning. Even the page, if you look at it, hold it up to the light, there's like little designs in it. And so there's a way in which silence is full of something, and you just need to kind of pay attention to it. If you ever tried to record yourself in a quiet place, maybe for a podcast, or if you were just trying to record yourself reading something, it's actually very hard to find a silent place. Because when you play back the recording, you always think, oh, there's a sound of a car, or there's a sound of a dog barking. And so actually silence for me is something that it's almost conceptual in a way.
Absolutely. And I know you live in Hong Kong, and we're here in Bangalore. And if you're in an urban city here in India, I think silence is almost as precious as gold, because you will always hear something. And as poets, we're observers, right? So I think we even observe the silence, right? Which is, I mean, obviously what you have done. And I, and that is so, that comes through so powerfully in your work. And I was wondering if you could maybe share a poem or two,
Sure.
and everyone else can get a taste of that as well.
Um, there is something I could share. A lot of my poems tend to be short, and there are these, there's sort of, many of the lines are double spaced, so I am interested in creating some air in the poems, or like, even if it's not a literal pause, a kind of um, subconscious pause in places for the reader. But let me read something that I thought about sharing this morning. This is a very short poem, but I have tinnitus, which is like a ringing in your ears. It's constant. Maybe some of you have this. So this poem came out of that, which implies that it's never silent for me.
Ironically, yeah.
Poor ear, mine own instrument. A note held for a lifetime, an experimental sound at a constant pitch, as if I were constituted by piercing.
Wow.
I do think I'm drawn to short poems partly because of my interest in haiku and the way that haiku sort of allows the reader to inhabit the poem and imagine themselves participating in the poem. I kind of like that orientation as a writer to kind of put the reader in that space. And I find that brevity is a way to do that. I also like juxtaposing images together and seeing what friction or what electricity sparks come off of that.
Right. Do you want to read another one for us?
Sure. Maybe I can read a little longer one. So this is I'll read the first poem in the book. It's called Sunbroker. Lifeguards can't save themselves from their own wasting. What's my record of attending to the world? A mute pool in winter. Is wisdom efficient? The sun's beams reach the patio in a tie. What I need is a continuous ray of light at my side. A chance to make up for the luxury of not understanding.
Wow, yeah, we could definitely see the brevity and the pauses in between.
Yeah, the little gaps, I guess.
Yeah.
Where I guess the idea is the reader has to jump with you, has to take that leap with you to the next point in the poem, and you hope it works.
So I want to.
Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Yeah. So I want to ask a little bit. So, like, what goes into writing a poem for you? Like for me, I mean, I guess between silence and song, there's that liminal space, which is a very meditative space, I'd like to say. And so, I could be ironing clothes or doing other chores, but what's going on? The first stage for me is rumination. So, rumination, and then after that, I like to call it distillation. And then the actual sculpting of the poem itself that comes out of all of that. Is it like that for you, or how does your process work?
I tend to do a lot of free writing, and then somehow the poem will emerge out of that. So I'm not super conscious in the sense of like, I'm going to write about X today. I tend to let the language sort of lead me through, and then try to discover what I'm thinking about that day through the writing. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and that's the beauty of writing and of poetry, is that one's processes can be so different. If someone comes up to me and says, I want to write poetry, how do I do it? Well, his way is so different. I don't do free writing at all. I think about it. It's almost like, when you have a kite string and, the kite is tugging. That's how it works for me. And so I have to think about it. I have to meditate on it almost. And it's beautiful. It's beautiful to hear the different processes.
I'd like to hear about your work in the sense of this book, Anadibai Joshi, A Life in Poems, because this is another kind of silence. I think this is a doctor whose story was kind of undertold or underrepresented. And then you wrote a series of poems about her life,
Right, right, right.
bringing
Thank you.
it to our
Yeah.
awareness. Can you say about that kind of silence and the way that you let it speak? Try
Sure.
to speak.
So, thank you. Thank you for the question. So, another type of silence is erasure. And when a story is hidden or on the margins, right, which many women's stories are, right, that's a type of silence, and you have to delve into that and bring it out. And I discovered Anandibai Joshi because I was working on another project based on the racism I'd faced as a child when I grew up in the United States. And, we were always told, always, and this line, unfortunately, never goes away, go back to where you came from. And I started wondering, where did we come from? My narrative began with my parents moving to the United States, but there must have been others before us. So while I was searching for that, I came upon this very powerful photograph of a woman. She was three women, in fact. One was Japanese, the other was Syrian, and then there was this woman in the middle who was wearing a sari, standing like this. And it was such a powerful photograph. It was in black and white. And I read the names of all of these women who were apparently doctors. And they were all in Philadelphia wearing their native dress when this photograph was taken. And it was as if she had pulled me in, and I wanted to know more about her. So when I started researching her, I found out that her story was known in Maharashtra, but it was always told through the lens of her husband being her savior. And I said, this woman in 1883 traveled all alone to the United States to study medicine, and it was all because of her husband? No, there had to be more. And so I started digging and digging and digging. And that's when I found out what an extraordinary woman she was in terms of her intelligence, her strength, and she was so outspoken. She broke every rule in the book you can think of, every societal rule at that time. She came from a conservative Brahmin family in Maharashtra, crossing the ocean meant tainting the waters, being impure. She didn't care about any of that. So her story just pulled me like a kite string. Yeah.
Do you mind reading maybe a representative poem? Because you also have some work in here that
Yes.
where the lines sort of there's some
Yeah.
gaps as well in some of the structure of the poems.
Absolutely. So the thing is, the challenge was to write about a life, and she lived only 21 years. And so I used different forms because a life isn't static, right? So I used pantoum, I used ghazals, I used couplets. I played around a lot with the form. And let's see. This is a poem called Middle Child, because she was born as the middle child. And I don't know, I sort of created my own form. I don't know if people can see where I have three lines in between, right? And I think it was because of the cadence, the rhythm of the poem. And then there's another poem which I tried to make in the shape of a river, and it's called Namkaran. So I'm going to actually share that poem because it's about the naming. When she was born, she was named Yamuna, but when she got married, her name was changed to Anandibai. So this naming and renaming and relabeling of women, I thought it was very important to emphasize that. So I'm just going to read Naming Namkaran. Is it really true that being named after a river is bad luck, a turbulent life? Are all women rivers then? And tell me the story again of how I came to be a paisley in your belly. Why you named me daughter of the blinding sun, sister of the Lord of death, tumbling down to earth to meet her blue beloved. How I was born the same day as a goddess riverine, whose holy drops the priest sprinkled on my forehead 11 days after my birth, introducing me to this world, whispering into my ear, Yamuna, 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 a contract signed in water, A girl's fate sealed. So the
Yeah, go ahead.
process was, writing this book was very different because it was, history, research.
There's an enormous amount of research that went into this. I
Yeah,
can see.
I did like 4 or 5 years of research, and it was like a puzzle, to figure out how to put all these pieces together. But I want to ask you, what is your process like when you're putting together a book? Do you have a certain theme? Like, uh, your poems, they're very personal, but at the same time, I feel there's this beautiful ornamental aspect to it as well. Um, there's beauty in the form, there's beauty in the lines, there's beauty in the imagery. How does it all come together for you?
Well, I wish I knew exactly. This book took many years to write. I think my previous book was almost like 10 years ago. So I had been writing the poems in this for a number of years. Then the pandemic struck, and it actually gave me, weirdly, this space to finish the book. Suddenly, my work obligations sort of like eased up, had more time to myself, and I could kind of just dwell in the poems and the manuscript and write write some poems to finish it. And then, I do think that even though I write alone, I have friends I share my work with. They can give me sort of their impressions and give me a sense that it's working, the poems are holding together or not. But you never really know, and then you send it out and hope a publisher is interested. But it did take a couple of iterations before it finally crystallized into the book it is now. But I think the through line is probably, I don't know, I think of like, I kind of call it the elegiac imagination, the way that thinking about mortality and death kind of can actually animate us. And so that's kind of one of my interests as a writer.
Right. This book as well came in its written form during the pandemic. And
Interesting.
speaking of silence, right? The whole world was on pause then. And I think all of us were so desperate to, you know, not embrace that silence because it was forced upon us, right? So to be able to feel we're productive, we're doing something, right? So this book came out of that. But at the same time, I think the world needed to be still for me to let in her world, her life. But, I wanted to ask you, there's a quote of yours, not a quote, but I took this quote out of an interview or a piece you had written in Poetry Society of America. And you said, "We are never not expressing ourselves. As Eliot might put it, this is the boredom and the horror and the glory of being alive. A poem exists in this continuum, arising both as an expression and a turning inward towards the nature of expression. The difficulty and the pleasure of writing a poem lie in the way that it must surpass or match the strange and continuous expression inherent in the world." So this sort of haunted me, that everything is about expressing itself. So what are we as writers and poets adding? And are we trying to compete with all the expressions that are going on around us, or is this something else entirely?
Hmm. Right. So I guess I was thinking about the Czech poet Miroslav Holub, who was a poet but also a trained immunologist, and he said something like, there's poetry in everything. This is the greatest argument against poetry.
Right.
And so for me, it's like. So John Ashbery, the American poet, said that you're kind of like next to this stream. Your mind is just constantly moving, and you just dip a bucket into the stream, and you lift it up, and it's full of stuff. And this is the poem that day. And
Catch of the day.
yeah, so it's an interesting metaphor, but I think it kind of makes sense that the writer is someone who's sort of trying to work with that material.
Right, right.
And so earlier you said ornamentation. Like I do believe in artifice, the importance of artifice as a for an artist that it's not just raw material, but you have to shape it to make it into something that is intelligible and that transfers to other
Right,
people.
right.
So sometimes art is like that. You just take something. It's like Duchamp's ready-made, right? You take a urinal, turn it upside down, and it's called the fountain. And so it's an everyday object, but the way you shape it,
Absolutely.
it becomes more meaningful or meaningful in a different way.
Yeah, that's what I, in my process, call the sculpting stage. But I'd love it if you could share a few more poems with us.
Maybe this might make sense. This is a poem I wrote just looking out the window, which I think a lot of poems come to people. It's called Hardwired. It's an elderly morning, the oldest one to date. 3 handsome dogs, triplets, walking loosely with their mistress, hovering above her work, as if she had a secret, or an admirer, or she were an admirer of secrets. Trees with mops of leaves. I'm thinking of the last time I ever climbed a tree, and why I ever stopped. I prefer the darker hours before dawn, when work is applauded by sunlight. I have a strong sense there is something very official and something very unofficial about these workmen emerging out of a hatchback.
Wow, beautiful. I love how in your poems that there are oftentimes opposing forces, right? The juxtaposition of like phrases that turn into each other as well. I mean, it makes, I think it creates a certain sort of surrealism, right? And you know, I think life is like that. There's so many things that happen that are really surreal, and you know, it's always fascinating to me as a writer and a poet to see how we approach experience, and that sort of leads me to asking, and I'm sure others ask the same thing: is why be a poet? You know, there's this poet Adrienne Rich whose work I really love, and she talks about being a poet and to write as if your life depended on it. And it might be a silly notion to think, oh, someone's life depends on poetry or they can't live without poetry, but I feel that way, and I'm wondering if you feel the same, and if so, why? Why are we poets? I think that's what I'm asking, essentially.
I guess everyone has their own answer. Um, you know, I'm quoting a former teacher of mine, but he said that he only feels like a poet when he's not writing. So I don't really think of. I think what he means is that when you're actually writing, these labels drop away. You're just writing. It's only later that we sort of apply, like, I'm this kind of poet, or we start to interpret what it means to us. But I like poetry because it's sort of apart from the marketplace, and it's apart from sort of genre distinctions. Do you know this French film Orphée, Jean Cocteau? There's a poet figure, and the judge, he's in front of a judge, the judge says, "What is a poet?" And he says, "One who writes, but is not a writer."
I love that. One who writes but is not a writer. Yeah.
What about you?
Um, well, I feel poetry is something, well, it came into my life when I was 9 years old, I want to say. And in fact, the first poem I wrote, I still remember it. It's a cute little ridiculous poem, but I'll share it. In spring, everything is born, baby trees, baby plants, and of course, mosquitoes and ants. That's the first poem I wrote. And I think I just took it from there. You know, I came across the work of Khalil Gibran, and his work just blew me away. I didn't understand it at the time, but I read The Prophet, And there was just something about it. It was so mysterious, so numinous, but also I loved how it was like you were taking a photograph of the words. And I was like, wow, this is such powerful writing. If I can write about my life like this, where everything is like, it's contained, it's like a bomb almost. Like your experience is contained in one little explosion. That's what poetry felt like to me. And I was like, why would I want to write anything else? I am, but I'm writing prose as well. But just poetry just seemed like that perfect window, that form, that photograph, through which I could view and process the world. So I was really discouraged being born into a traditional Indian family, become a doctor, become a lawyer, do content writing, do technical writing. And, I studied creative writing, journalism. I was even told, become a journalist, you'll earn some money. But it just wouldn't let go of me. So I always like to think that poetry chose me. Because once it came into my life, it wouldn't let go. And I don't know if it's that way with every poet, but that's how it is with me.
Yeah. Should we open the floor to?
Sure. Do you want to hear some more poems, or do you all have questions? You have questions? More poems?
Why don't you read one?
Awesome. Well, you know what? I would love to share the poem which started this book, that black and white photograph that I'd mentioned before. And let me see. I'm really bad at finding my own poems. Yeah, here it is, page 79. So this poem that I'll be reading, I really struggled. So I'd written most of the book, but I wanted to write a poem as if the photograph was speaking to everybody. And that's called an ekphrastic poem. But I really struggled because I didn't want it to seem as if Anandi Bai was talking down to everybody, and I didn't want to put my own biases into it. But then I looked at the photograph, and I realized that it was such an iconic photograph for so many reasons. 3 women from 3 different countries in their native dress. And the photographer was probably a white male who took the photograph. Were they asked to come dressed in their native clothes? All 3 of them weren't even smiling. And it was at a time when exoticism was really, really high, in that part of the world. So I thought, let me try and write this in a form, and it's called a duplex form, which is sort of like a fusion. I mean, it's couplets and sort of like a ghazal as well. So I found this poem within a form. Otherwise, I was really struggling to write it. But anyway, it's called When They Ask Us to Pose for a Photograph at the Women's Medical College Reception, Philadelphia, 1885. Forgive us if we don't smile, the ocean's scent, still on our clothes, the stench of sea. We visitors of another clime, of warmer lands are we. With pride we wear our native clothes, silks and jewels we proudly don. Sari, kimono, headdress of coins, with lyre, sash, a handheld fan. No scalpel, stethoscope, or degree. 3 female doctors, a foreign pedigree, playing dress-up for Western eyes. In our appearance, they see worlds wild. Forgive us if we don't smile. So, I mean, the form really helped me bring out what was going on in that photograph.
Yeah.
And I didn't want to dumb down the photograph. And if you all have a chance, please Google Anandibai Joshi, and that iconic photograph will come up. It's just really like, I've never seen a photograph radiate so much fierce energy. Yeah.
Yeah, photograph is silent, but obviously a picture speaks 1,000 words.
Well, it drew me into this whole craziness. It pulled me down the rabbit hole. But I would love for you to read a poem or 2.
Well,
And maybe we can end after that, and hopefully we'll have questions, and I can tempt you all by saying we'll be absolutely honest about the process of being a poet. So ask anything and everything.
How about if I read a very short one? This is the shortest poem in the book.
Oh, okay.
Because I do want to hear from the audience a bit. And this actually speaks to our theme. I don't even know if this is a poem. You tell me. The withheld detail of the dream. A pause on my lips. You fill in what you feel.
Wow. Can you read that again?
Okay. Well, the withheld detail of the dream. A pause on my lips. You fill in what you feel.
I think you've encapsulated what the whole panel is about between silence and song, in those two lines. So beautiful, beautiful. So yeah, this has been such a wonderful conversation. I was a little worried that our other two poets were not here, and I was going to obviously miss them, and but I'm really happy that we are able to talk about this and share our craft, our insights. So it's been such a pleasure, and let's see if the audience has some questions for us. Any budding poets out there? Yes. Maybe somebody could bring a mic. Yeah.
Sure, if a mic isn't required.
Well, maybe for the others to hear your question. Yeah.
Good morning.
Good morning.
My question revolves around the painful process of how a poet goes about, getting a first volume out in print.
Could you speak a little louder, please?
My question revolves around the painful process of, how a poet goes about putting their first volume out in print.
Right. Well, do you want to answer that, or there I think are different stages to it, depending on your first collection. Usually, a first collection can be between 45 to 90 pages. I think that's a decent size, but so I feel the first thing is to have that many poems, right? And I wouldn't be too concerned with theme unless from the very beginning, like I was in this book, focusing on somebody's life. But if you're just writing a collection of poems based on your own life or inspired by your life experiences, I wouldn't worry too much about themes in the beginning. I'd first collect as many poems as I can. Then after that, what I would do is see, what common threads are running through it, because there always are. There are always repetitions of motifs or different themes, and I actually in my first collection really struggled with that and how to put the order in. So I visually laid them on the floor, and just the whole physicality of seeing them and being able to move them versus working on a computer, that really helped with organization. And I don't know if you've ever done that.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, the order is meaningful. You should think about that, sequencing of the poems. I was just going to say, I don't know, in the US, typically you need to win a book contest run by a publisher, and then that's the most common way to get a first book published. If you're lucky, maybe someone can introduce you to a publisher and they'll publish you, but typically you need to win a contest. But I don't know here the method.
Well, here they don't have as many contests. I think there might be one or two, but in general there aren't. But then what I would say is, once you have the poems, you feel you have some sort of a order, create that rough draft, share it with like-minded friends or somebody you really respect, who might have experience in writing, or if you know an editor of some sort, so they can give you feedback. And the key is revision. So here, I lived here in Bangalore for 7 years. I mentored quite a few people. And what I found, which I hope has changed, is that people were really resistant to revision. Whereas revision is actually the key. Revision is what makes your work golden. You might have this rough manuscript, but revising it is what will make it shine. So don't be in a rush. Don't think, oh, by the time I'm 28, I need to have a book out. let it live and breathe like wine. So sit with your work. Once you put it together, put it aside for a few weeks because you'll be sick of it. You'll need a break from it, and you'll need a pair of fresh eyes to revisit it. So do that. Then once you get feedback from people, you do some revisions. Um, I would say in parallel, start sharing your work. If they're poetry readings somewhere, like I know here, like Urban Solace has weekly readings, things like that. Go to those, share your work, see how people respond to your work. Put yourself out there. It's really scary at first, but once you take that big step, you'll realize how empowering it can be as well. So do that in parallel, and then after that, try to send your work to journals to get it published. And also read. I cannot emphasize enough, and I know you as a teacher probably really emphasize that as well. Read as many poets and writers as you can, because I have heard a lot of students come and say, oh, I love to write poetry, but I hate reading it. You can't be a poet unless you read as well, right? So I mean, what are your thoughts on that?
Of course, yeah, yeah. There's a lot of information. Is that?
Yeah.
Can you take something?
That's pretty much obvious to me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and so then after you get all that feedback, look at books which you love and see who their publishers are. And I found poets especially to be some of the most generous people. So reach out to poets you love and admire and ask their advice. Like, what do you think I can do with my work? Where can it be placed? Usually you'll find a window or you'll find an outlet of how to get your work out there. So I hope this is helpful. Sure. Do we have any other questions out there? Okay, there's somebody there.
I think we have 1.5 minutes. Go ahead.
Hi.
Hi.
So my name is Gautami. I also write poetry. And my question is for you, Shikha. So your book, right, it's about something quite niche. So um, the entire book is basically based off of the life of this one
Yes,
person.
yes.
And I like how you talked about falling down a rabbit hole and how every time you read a poem from it or you have to tell people about it, you kind of have to give a lot of context, right? Like
Right, right.
So you always have to talk about Anandi Bai and talk
Yes.
about how the photograph and all of that.
Yes.
So I'm someone who also falls down the rabbit hole quite a bit when I go into poetry. There'll be music references and all sorts of things
Right.
in one thing. So I've been told that you should be able to write a poem without having to give that much context. Like there are people who've read my poetry and been like, you shouldn't have to explain it so much, you shouldn't have to tell people what you mean about this and then have to read the poem. So what would you say is a good bridge between that, to be able to write about something niche, something that is so specific and has so much context and history behind it, or something that you very much
Right.
wanted to bring to the forefront, in your poetry, while also keeping it something that stands by itself?
Right, right.
Yeah.
That's a great question. And in this case, I was writing about a life. And so I have to give context. But if you're writing about something that's niche and specific, it's okay. You can give yourself permission to give context. Because I know of a lot of poets who will quote Rimbaud or they'll quote somebody else who is an influence. And not everybody knows these references, but they don't give an explanation beforehand, right? So I think there will often be enough contextual clues in the work itself. And when we talk about space, right, there's so much that's said and that's unsaid, and you have to read between the lines. So that is where one strikes the balance. Even if, the poem I read, the title alone explained a lot, right? And even if somebody doesn't know who Anandi Bai is, because I don't mention her name, they will know this poem is about 3 women who were doctors in 1883 who were dressed up and being exoticized through the lens, right? And that is enough. You don't need to show and tell everything. You shouldn't have to. Poetry is that one genre where I feel you can show glimpses and that is enough. If a person wants to know more, they will go online and search for it. So just go ahead and write what you want to write.
Okay, I think we're getting the sign that we've hit our time limit. So
Oh, that's great.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, and thanks to the audience.
Thank you for all for coming. I know it's Sunday morning. People are probably, at brunch and stuff like that. So I'm glad you all came here and brunched on some poetry. Thank you.